The galaxy was alive with voices, signals, and messages. Every star system spoke in light and sound. Ships carried trade, colonies sent reports, and stations broadcast their presence. It was a chorus of countless civilizations, each adding its own note to the music of the stars. But then the voices began to fall silent. First, one world stopped answering, then another, and another. At first, humans thought it was just distance or broken machines, but silence spread like a shadow, moving across the stars. Explorers who traveled far reported the same. The stations they knew were empty, the colonies they remembered were gone. Messages went unanswered, even distress calls received nothing but cold silence. On Earth, scientists tried again and again. They sent beams of light, radio bursts, encrypted codes, anything that could reach. But the void gave back no reply. No one told them why. No one explained. It was as if the entire galaxy had turned its back. The governments met in secret rooms. Leaders asked questions no one could answer. Had the aliens fallen in war? Had they been destroyed? Or had they chosen to leave humanity alone? The unknown was heavier than any truth. Fear spread, but confusion was greater. Ordinary people noticed too. Traders could not sell beyond the system. Pilots found routes cut off. Families waiting for messages from colonies never received them. The silence was not only in space, it was inside homes, inside hearts. And yet, there was no attack, no warning, no clear enemy. It was not war, not peace, but something colder. It was rejection. The galaxy had chosen silence, and silence was louder than any weapon. In the cities of Earth, some still hoped it was temporary. They believed the voices would return, but days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to years, and still the galaxy remained quiet. The stars that once spoke now looked down like watchers with sealed mouths. Humanity asked itself why. Were they too young, too reckless, too violent? Had they broken some law of the stars without knowing? Or were they simply judged unworthy of standing among the elder races? No answer came, only silence. For a long time, Earth stood waiting. They waited for a message, for a single word, for proof that they were not alone. But no word came. The silence stretched, heavy and endless. It pressed on minds and crushed hope. In that silence, some gave up. They said humanity should accept being left behind. Others grew angry, saying the galaxy was arrogant, that Earth had to fight for its place. And others grew afraid, fearing what silence truly meant. But whatever their feelings, all knew one truth. The galaxy had turned its back. At night, when people looked at the stars, they no longer saw friends or neighbors. They saw a wall of lights, unreachable and closed. The silence had changed the stars themselves. They no longer shone with promise. They shone with refusal. In this silence, a choice waited to be made. Would humanity fade quietly, or would they answer in a voice the galaxy could not ignore? The silence was heavy, but inside that weight, a fire began to burn. It was only a spark now, hidden, small. But sparks can grow and fire can speak louder than silence. The galaxy had fallen quiet, but humanity was not finished. Their story was only beginning. Far away from Earth, in the hidden halls of the Galactic Council, the decision was made. Representatives of ancient races sat in silence, their eyes heavy with judgment. They had watched humanity rise. They had studied humans with both curiosity and fear. And now they believed the time had come to decide humanity's place in the stars. The council chamber was vast. A circle of towering thrones made of crystal and metal. Each alien spoke in their own tongue, yet the machines translated into one voice. Some argued that humanity was reckless, quick to fight, and dangerous. Others whispered that humans carried fire in their hearts, a fire that could burn the galaxy. But no one spoke for Earth. No human voice was allowed inside those walls. No invitation was sent. No chance was given. The decision was made without them, in shadows where light could not reach. The vote was taken. By a wide majority, the council turned their backs. They cut ties with Earth. They closed their trade, their alliances, their treaties. One by one, the doors of the galaxy were locked, and humanity was left outside. This was not war, for war required words. This was exile, an exile without warning, without explanation. It was not the sound of weapons, but the sound of silence. Back on Earth, the people felt the weight of that cold shoulder. Ships that once carried goods found ports closed. Messages sent to allies were ignored. Colonies beyond human borders were abandoned without help. The galaxy had decided that humanity would walk alone. At first, humans searched for answers. They believed there must be a mistake, a misunderstanding. They begged for even one message, one word, but none came. Instead, silence pressed harder, colder, like ice around their world. Scientists called it the Great Quiet. Pilots called it the empty sky. Children asked their parents why the stars no longer answered. But no parent could explain, because even they did not understand. Among the alien races, there were whispers. Some pitied the humans, but they dared not speak. Others feared them, believing silence would keep humanity weak, but a few feared something greater. They feared silence would not weaken humans, but sharpen them. On Earth, debates raged. Some leaders said humanity should accept its exile. Others demanded strength, saying Earth must survive without the galaxy. But beneath all arguments, one truth burned. The galaxy had chosen to leave them behind. The cold shoulder was more painful than open war, for war at least gave meaning, gave recognition. Silence gave nothing but emptiness. It was as if humanity did not exist, as if billions of voices had no right to speak among the stars. Still, there were those who refused to bow. Explorers stared at the dark sky and swore they would not be erased. Soldiers sharpened their blades and prepared for the day they might be called. And thinkers, scientists, dreamers, all searched for a way to break the silence, for silence could be heavy, but it could also be broken. In hidden labs, ships were built stronger, faster, sharper. Weapons that once seemed impossible became reality. The cold shoulder did not freeze humanity. It forced them to grow teeth. Every act of rejection became fuel. Every closed door became a reason to build their own. The council believed they had ended Earth's voice, but in truth they had only changed it. Words were denied, trade was denied, peace was denied. So humanity found another language, a language not of sound but of fire. The galaxy had turned its back, but Earth had not forgotten, and in the silence humanity began to plan its reply, a reply the galaxy would never forget. On Earth, silence was no longer just an absence of sound, it had become a shadow over daily life. People walked the streets with questions in their hearts, but no answers on their tongues. Children looked at the night sky, wondering why the stars had abandoned them. Families who once traded or spoke with distant colonies now sat waiting for messages that never came. The governments tried to hide the truth at first. They said it was only a delay, a storm in the signals, a temporary break in contact. But time kept passing, and the silence did not lift. The lie grew thin, and fear began to spread like a quiet sickness. Scientists gathered in crowded labs, their screens glowing with unanswered transmissions. They tried every frequency, every code, every language they knew, but the void answered them with nothing. The silence had become like a wall, thick and unbreakable. Whispers began to rise among the people. Some said the aliens had betrayed humanity, others said humanity had done something unforgivable, and a few believed a darker thought, that something terrible had destroyed the other races, and Earth would be next. In cafes, in markets, in schools, people whispered stories. Some whispered of secret wars fought beyond human sight. Some whispered that humanity had been judged too violent, too wild, and some whispered that the aliens feared humanity's growing power. The whispers grew louder every day, filling the silence with rumor and fear. In the shadows of the cities, anger was born. Young men and women who felt abandoned began to gather. They painted symbols of fire on walls. They swore humanity would never be forgotten. They spoke of building their own strength, a strength no silence could erase. The leaders of Earth tried to calm them. They spoke on screens, promising peace, patience, and hope, but their voices trembled. They too felt the silence pressing and their backs. They too saw the cold shoulder of the galaxy. Among the common people, trust began to fade. Some accused their own leaders of weakness, others accused them of hiding secrets, and others said the leaders already knew the truth, that the galaxy had cast Earth out forever. Yet even in despair, sparks of courage appeared. Explorers who once traveled for trade now spoke of traveling for answers. Soldiers trained harder, not for orders, but for survival, and scientists began whispering in labs about new engines, new weapons, new ways to break the wall of silence. The whispers of fear were slowly joined by whispers of defiance. If the galaxy has closed its doors, they said, we will build our own doors. If the stars refuse to hear us, they said, we will make them listen. These were only whispers, but whispers can grow into storms. At night, when the world was quiet, people still looked up. The stars seemed close, yet farther than ever before. Once they were symbols of wonder, now they were symbols of betrayal. But in the hearts of those who gazed at them, something new was forming, a promise, unspoken but strong. If the galaxy had chosen silence, humanity would choose fire. Whispers carried through the streets, across oceans, through wires and hidden channels. They carried doubt, but they also carried hope. Hope that Earth would not remain voiceless forever. Hope that silence would one day be broken. The galaxy thought humanity would stay quiet, but whispers were already rising, and whispers, when gathered together, can become a roar. Whispers had filled the streets of Earth, but whispers were not enough. Soon, those whispers turned into sparks, small but dangerous. People who once only spoke of silence began to act against it. And in hidden corners of the world, the fire of defiance was born. It began with the explorers. They had always looked to the stars with longing, and now they looked with anger. Ships that once carried supplies and goods were refitted with weapons. Engines once meant for trade were rebuilt for speed and pursuit. Explorers who once dreamed of peace now dreamed of strength. In military bases, soldiers trained harder than ever before, not for missions from the galaxy, but for the survival of Earth itself. They lifted heavier weights, practiced longer hours, and built weapons stronger than before. The silence of the stars had turned into their greatest enemy, and against silence, they prepared to shout with fire. In the labs, scientists whispered about engines that could travel faster. They drew plans for ships with armor thicker than ever. They studied energy weapons that could pierce even the strongest shields, and though their budgets were small and their resources limited, their will was unshaken. Every scientist carried a quiet thought: if the galaxy refuses us, we will create our own future. Leaders on Earth tried to slow the growing fire. They warned that anger could bring danger, that rushing forward might make enemies of powers greater than Earth, but their voices were weaker now, drowned by the sound of whispers turning into shouts. The people no longer wished to wait, they no longer wished to be silent. Among the younger generation, a new spirit was rising. They wore badges shaped like flames. They spread messages across networks, saying Earth would not bow. They spoke not of despair, but of destiny. Their fire spread from one city to another until the world began to burn with determination. And then, the first act of defiance came. A small human ship, armed with makeshift weapons, intercepted a silent alien probe near the edge of the system. The probe ignored their calls, just as the galaxy had ignored Earth, so the humans destroyed it, leaving nothing but fragments drifting in the void. It was a simple act, but it was a message written in flame. The news spread like wildfire. Some called it foolish, some called it dangerous, but many called it necessary. For the first time, silence was answered. And though the answer was not words, it was louder than any voice. The galaxy took notice. In hidden stations far from Earth, alien eyes watched the fire grow. They had hoped that silence would keep humanity weak, but silence had instead become the fuel of their rage. And with every whisper, every spark, the fire grew brighter. On Earth, people gathered in squares to celebrate. They did not cheer for war, but for defiance. They did not cheer for destruction, but for survival. In their hearts, they felt united for the first time in years, not as nations divided, but as one species, one humanity, standing against the cold shoulder of the stars. The spark had been lit. It was small, but it was unstoppable. From whispers to sparks, from sparks to fire, humanity was changing. They would not fade in silence. They would not be forgotten. They would answer the galaxy in the only language left to them, and that language was fire. The spark of fire had been lit, but sparks are never enough. To prove their voice, humanity needed more than symbols, and soon, the chance came, a chance written in the cold stars. At the edge of the solar system, where human ships rarely went, an alien patrol appeared. It was small, only 3 vessels, moving slow as if watching from afar. They did not send a greeting, they did not reply to signals. They simply drifted, silent, just like the rest of the galaxy. When Earth Command saw the ships, debates began. Some leaders said to ignore them, to let them pass. Others demanded action, saying the galaxy must know Earth was not afraid, but silence had pushed humanity too far. This time, silence would not be accepted. A human fleet of 5 ships was sent. They were not grand, not polished, but strong and prepared. Their engines glowed bright, their weapons armed for the first time in history. On board, soldiers whispered to each other. They were nervous, but they were ready. This was not only a mission. This was the first stand of Earth. When the 2 groups met in the void, tension thickened like smoke. The human commander sent a message. "This is Earth. Answer us." But the alien ships gave no reply. Again the commander spoke, his voice sharp with anger. "Speak, or turn back." The silence that followed was heavier than any threat. Finally, the alien ships moved. Not forward, not backward, but to the side. They tried to slip away quietly, refusing to even acknowledge the humans. That movement was enough. To the humans, it was an insult greater than war. To turn their backs without a word was to deny Earth's very existence. The human commander gave the order. Weapons fired. Beams of light cut across the dark. One alien ship fell in flames. Another barely escaped with heavy damage. The last turned and ran into the void, its silence finally broken by the roar of battle. For the first time, humanity had clashed with the galaxy. It was short, fierce, and shocking. The humans had expected answers, but what they received was emptiness. The aliens did not fight back with full power, they only retreated, and that retreat told humanity everything they needed to know. The galaxy would not speak to them, it would only try to erase them with silence. On Earth, the news spread like fire. Some were afraid, saying humanity had provoked powers too great to face. Others celebrated, saying humanity had shown it would never bow. In the streets, voices grew louder, stronger, and unified. The silence of the galaxy had been answered with the fire of humanity. In secret halls of alien councils, whispers grew uneasy. The humans had struck first, and the strike had been bold. They had not waited, they had not begged. They had shouted into the silence with fire, and now the galaxy could no longer pretend Earth was weak. The first clash had ended, but it was not the end of silence. It was the beginning of something greater. For once a voice is raised, it cannot be forgotten, and once fire is lit, it cannot easily be put out. The galaxy had turned away, but Earth had followed, and in the darkness they had spoken with weapons. The first clash had marked the sky, and the galaxy, for the first time, began to fear what the humans might become. The first clash had shaken the galaxy, but it had changed humanity even more. On Earth, no one spoke of waiting anymore. The silence was broken, and the people had tasted what it meant to be heard through action. They understood now. Words would not open the doors of the galaxy, only fire would. In cities across the planet, people gathered in squares and cheered. They lit torches and fires in the night, symbols of their defiance. Children carried small flame emblems. Old men and women spoke of destiny. For the first time, Earth was united by one voice, and that voice was not of speech, but of will. The leaders tried to keep control, but they were swept by the tide. Every politician, every commander, every council now spoke the same line. If the galaxy will not listen to our words, it will listen to our fire. And with those words, humanity's path was sealed. Factories worked day and night, engines roared, sparks flew, and ships were built faster than ever before. No longer were they ships of trade or exploration. They were ships of flame, built to shout into the silence, weapons stronger, armor heavier, speed greater. Every detail was sharpened by determination. The soldiers felt the change too. Training grounds echoed with drills. Pilots tested maneuvers in the sky until their bodies ached. Every man and woman knew they were no longer defending Earth. They were preparing to send a message to the stars. The message was simple. It was not made of words or signals. It was made of strength. It was made of fire, and the galaxy would understand it, whether it wished to or not. Soon, the first great test came. A blockade of alien ships appeared near a human colony, silent as always. They blocked trade, cut supplies, and offered no explanation. The people of the colony feared they would be abandoned, but Earth did not turn away. Earth sent fire. A fleet of human ships jumped into the void, their hulls shining with new armor, their cannons ready. The aliens tried to hold their line, but this time, the humans did not wait for answers. They attacked with speed and fury. Missiles roared, beams of light tore through shields, explosions painted the stars. The battle was fierce, but it did not last long. The alien blockade broke, scattered, and fled into the dark. And when it was done, the human fleet stood victorious. For the first time, humanity had not only survived, but won. The colony celebrated, their voices crying out in joy. Across Earth, the news spread like a storm. Every corner of the world heard the same story. Silence had been met with fire, and fire had answered louder than silence ever could. In the alien councils, fear grew. They had believed silence would erase humanity, but now they saw their mistake. Silence had only sharpened them, fire had only strengthened them, and now the humans were not begging for recognition, they were demanding it. Back on Earth, the people knew what this meant. The galaxy would not forgive them. More battles would come, greater enemies would rise, but no one trembled anymore, for they had found their voice, and their voice burned bright. The message of fire had been sent. It had crossed the stars, it had broken the blockade, it had reached the galaxy. And though enemies would rise, though silence might still surround them, the galaxy could no longer pretend Earth did not exist. For in the dark void, the humans had spoken, and their words were fire. The battle near the colony had ended, but its echo spread far beyond the stars. Every race in the galaxy felt the tremor of that victory. The silence that once covered Earth had been broken, and now the galaxy could no longer ignore the fire. In hidden councils, alien leaders gathered. They replayed the battle recordings again and again. They watched small human ships move with speed and fury. They saw how Earth's fire tore through a blockade that was meant to be unbreakable, and fear grew in their eyes. Some races whispered that humanity was too dangerous to be left alive. Others whispered that they had been wrong to turn their backs. But no one could agree on a path, because fire had changed everything. The elders of the council argued long into the night. One said, "The humans must be crushed before their fire spreads." Another said, "Their fire is already spreading. Crushing them now will only turn flame into wildfire." And yet another voice whispered, "Perhaps the humans were never meant to be silent. Perhaps they were meant to burn." But those words were quickly silenced. No one dared defend humanity openly. Across alien worlds, ordinary citizens heard rumors. Some laughed at the idea that humans could win battles against the great powers. Others whispered in fear, wondering if the fire might reach their own skies. For the first time, alien children asked their parents about Earth. For the first time, the word human was spoken not with dismissal, but with caution. Merchants in far-off systems closed their trade routes to Earth in fear, but others saw profit in secret. Ships began moving in shadows, carrying supplies to human colonies. For even in silence, there were always those who listened when fire spoke. Meanwhile, in hidden chambers, spies reported troubling truths. Human factories were running day and night. New ships were leaving dry docks every woe. Weapons stronger than before were already being tested. The fire was not slowing, it was growing. The council tried to reassure themselves. They told each other that humanity was small, that Earth was only one world among thousands. But deep inside, they knew size no longer mattered. What mattered was will, and humanity's will was burning brighter than theirs. Some alien races began preparing their fleets. They gathered ships, armed their weapons, and stationed them along the borders. Others pulled back in fear, refusing to confront the fire directly. And a few secretly admired the humans, whispering that perhaps fire was better than silence. On Earth, the news of these whispers reached the people. They knew the galaxy was watching. They knew their fire had not gone unseen. And instead of fear, it gave them pride. For every ship built, every weapon tested, every battle fought, they were not just defending themselves. They were sending a message. The galaxy had thought silence would erase them, but now silence had been broken. And in its place came shockwaves, ripples of fear, ripples of doubt, ripples of respect. The council feared the fire. The people of Earth embraced it, and the galaxy for the first time began to realize a truth. Humanity had been abandoned, but humanity had not died. They had risen, sharper and stronger. They had spoken in a voice no one could ignore. The fire was no longer a spark. It was spreading, carrying shockwaves across the galaxy. And though no one would admit it aloud, every race now understood. The humans were not fading. They were just beginning. The shockwaves of fear had spread across the galaxy, but Earth was not finished. The fire inside humanity burned brighter with every day, and soon, that fire would lead them to their first great victory, a victory that would change everything. It began when news came from the frontier. A human colony at the edge of space was under siege. Dozens of alien ships surrounded it, cutting off food, supplies, and power. The people inside the colony sent desperate calls for help. Once, those calls would have gone unanswered. But now, Earth was no longer silent. The leaders of Earth gathered. Some warned that sending a fleet was too dangerous. They said the colony might already be lost. Others argued that if humanity did not fight, they would always remain weak. At last, the decision was made. A fleet would be sent, not to beg, not to plead, but to fight. The fleet left Earth in silence. Dozens of ships glided through the void, their engines burning like sparks in the dark. On board, soldiers sat in quiet rows, their hands gripping weapons, their hearts heavy with purpose. They knew what this mission meant. If they won, humanity would no longer be seen as a victim. If they lost, the galaxy would believe fire was nothing but smoke. When they arrived, the scene was grim. Alien ships hovered around the colony like wolves circling prey. The colony's lights flickered weakly, its defenses nearly gone. But when the humans appeared, their arrival was like thunder. The human commander gave no warning, no plea, no request. He gave only an order. Fire. The battle exploded. Human ships roared forward, missiles streaking across the void, beams of energy tearing through shields. The aliens fought back, confident in their numbers. But the humans fought with something stronger than numbers. They fought with fire born from rejection. They fought with unity born from silence. The colony watched as the black sky lit with flame. For hours, the void shook with war. Ships burned, explosions painted the darkness, wreckage drifted between the stars, and in the end, when the smoke cleared, it was humanity that remained standing. The alien fleet was shattered, their survivors fleeing into the unknown. The human fleet stood bruised, battered, but unbroken, and the colony was saved. For the first time in history, humanity had defended their own against the galaxy, and they had won. The people of the colony cried out with joy. They painted flames on their walls, they sang songs of fire. Children pointed at the human fleet with pride. They knew now Earth would never abandon them. They knew now silence had been defeated. When news reached Earth, the world erupted, cities filled with cheers, streets burned with celebrations. For the first time, every human felt the same truth. They were not small, they were not weak. They had faced the galaxy, and they had won. In the alien councils, fear deepened. The humans had not only fought, they had won against greater numbers. The silence that once erased them now looked fragile, for silence could not stop fire, and fire had spoken loudly. The first victory was more than just a battle. It was a message carved into the stars. Humanity would not fade. Humanity would not bow. The galaxy had turned its back, but humanity had found its own path. A path lit by fire, a path sharpened by victory. The silence was broken, the fire had grown, and the galaxy, for the first time, began to understand. The humans were not waiting for permission. The humans were taking their place. And with their first victory, the war of voices had only just begun. The first victory had changed everything. Earth was no longer a forgotten voice in the dark. They had fought, they had won, and now the flame was rising. Factories thundered across the planet. Engines roared, sparks flew, metal rang against metal. Every dockyard glowed with light as ships were built one after another, no longer slow, no longer weak. Humanity's fleets were becoming faster, stronger, deadlier. Soldiers trained until their hands bled. Pilots drilled until they could fly in silence with eyes closed. Every human who wore the mark of fire carried it with pride. They no longer trained only to defend. They trained to carry their flame into the galaxy. The young burned with even greater fury. They wore the symbol of fire on their jackets, on their walls, even on their skin. In every street, people spoke of destiny. No longer did they whisper of fear. Now they shouted of hope, of defiance, of victory. Alien spies who watched from shadows sent troubling reports. They saw a world united, a people who no longer bent under silence. They wrote of fleets growing faster than expected, of weapons sharper than before, of humans who fought with fire not only in their hands but in their hearts. The councils argued endlessly. Some demanded to crush Earth before the fire grew beyond control. Others feared that fighting would only spread the flames further. No decision came, only fear and delay. And in that delay, humanity rose higher. One by one, colonies once abandoned were taken back. Human fleets tore through blockades, scattered patrols, and reclaimed lost ground. Where silence had left ruins, humans rebuilt. Where the galaxy had turned away, humans lit fire. Each victory was small, but together they grew, and with each victory, the flame burned brighter. The galaxy began to watch with unease. Planets whispered that humans were unstoppable. Merchants told tales of human fleets striking with speed and vanishing like storms. Even children on alien worlds played games of fire and silence, and always, fire won. On Earth, leaders spoke to the people. Their voices carried across every screen. They said, "We are no longer alone. We are no longer silent." The cheers shook the cities, for the people already knew the truth. They were rising, and nothing could stop them. But the rise was not without cost. Ships returned scarred and broken. Soldiers returned with empty eyes. Families mourned those who never came back. The fire gave strength, but it also demanded sacrifice, and humanity paid that price without hesitation. The more they fought, the more the galaxy feared them. The more they won, the more the galaxy respected them. What had begun as whispers was now a roar. What had begun as sparks was now a blaze. The silence that once crushed Earth had become fuel. Fuel for ships, fuel for courage, fuel for destiny. The galaxy had tried to erase humanity, but instead, they had created something greater. They had created a rising flame. In every corner of the void, the message was clear. Humanity would not bow. Humanity would not fade. They had been silent once, but never again. The flame was spreading, and the galaxy, whether in fear or awe, would see it. The humans were rising, and their fire had only just begun to burn. The fire of humanity had spread too far to ignore. The galaxy had hoped to keep Earth silent, but now the silence itself was breaking. Voices that had once turned away began to return, timid and cautious, like shadows in the dark. It began with the smallest races, traders and wanderers who lived between greater powers. They had once refused to answer human calls, fearing punishment from the council, but now they sent secret messages. They whispered across hidden channels, "We see your fire, we hear your voice." Some offered supplies, others offered information, not out of kindness, but out of fear and respect. Then came the mid-strength powers, worlds that had once mocked Earth as young and reckless. They spoke carefully, sending envoys with soft words and softer hands. "We did not wish for your exile," they claimed. "We were forced to obey the council," they said. But their words were half-truths. They had been silent when Earth cried out, and now they returned only because fire left them no choice. On Earth, the people did not forget. They remembered every unanswered signal, every ignored plea, every silent betrayal. And so, when voices returned, humans did not greet them with open arms. They listened, but with suspicion. They nodded, but with fire in their eyes, for they knew the galaxy had turned its back once and could do it again. The councils grew restless. Their silence was cracking, their unity breaking. Some members begged to speak with Earth, others demanded that silence continue. But even among themselves, fear had planted seeds. They saw that their walls of silence had failed, and they wondered if fire would soon come for them too. Humanity, meanwhile, grew stronger. They accepted aid when it came, but they no longer depended on it. Their fleets stood ready, their colonies rebuilt, their fire brighter than ever. They no longer waited for voices. I no longer begged for recognition, but still, the voices came, because silence could not hold back fire. In alien markets, whispers of humans filled the air. Merchants told tales of their victories. Children played games of fire ships against silent fleets, and in every story the humans won. The galaxy could no longer deny them. The humans were no longer in exile. They were a force. And so, the voices returned in greater numbers. Ambassadors arrived at Earth, their ships carrying banners of peace. They bowed, they offered treaties, they promised trade, but humanity listened with careful ears. They had not forgotten the years of silence. They had not forgotten the cold shoulder of the galaxy. The people of Earth spoke a new truth. We will listen, but we will not beg. We will speak, but our words will be fire. And the galaxy understood. The old balance had ended, the silence was broken, and a new order had begun. Some aliens spoke out of fear, others out of respect, but all of them spoke, for silence was no longer possible. Humanity had made its voice too loud, too sharp, too burning. The fire had forced the galaxy to listen. The return of voices was not a gift, it was not forgiveness, it was surrender. The galaxy had turned its back once, but now it turned back again, not because of mercy, not because of kindness, but because the fire of humanity had left them no choice. The voices had returned, but they returned too late, for humanity was no longer the same. The silence that once crushed them had forged them, sharpened them, and set them aflame. Now, when the galaxy spoke, humanity no longer listened as a student, but as an equal. Across Earth, people remembered the beginning. They remembered the silence that had wrapped the planet like chains. They remembered unanswered messages, empty skies, abandoned colonies. And they remembered how they had survived, not with words, but with fire. The galaxy turned its back. Others fell silent. But humanity had spoken with fire, and that fire had changed everything. In the great halls of the Alien Council, the tone was no longer one of arrogance. Once, they spoke of humans as children, unworthy of a seat. Now they spoke of them with caution, with respect, with fear. Ambassadors from Earth walked those halls, their steps steady, their voices calm. They carried no plea, no apology, only truth. The truth that humanity had made a place for itself, not by permission, but by power. The galaxy had no choice but to listen, for silence was no longer possible. Every human fleet, every burning victory, every rising flame had carved their name into the stars, and no council, no empire, no ancient race could erase it. Among ordinary aliens, whispers filled the streets. Some admired the humans, calling them brave. Others hated them, calling them dangerous, but none ignored them. And that was humanity's greatest triumph. They were no longer forgotten. They were no longer silent. They had forced the galaxy to see them. On Earth, people stood taller. They were no longer begging for entry into the galactic stage. They were already standing on it, their fire lighting the way. Children no longer asked why the stars were silent. They asked instead how far the fire could spread. And their parents answered with pride. As far as we choose to go, but fire is never without cost. The scars of battle-covered ships and soldiers alike, many never returned. Many names were etched into stone. And yet, even in mourning, humanity stood unbroken, for their sacrifice had given birth to a voice that could never again be silenced. The final echo of silence was gone. In its place, fire roared across the galaxy. Every battle, every clash, every act of defiance had become a language. And that language spoke a truth no one could deny. Humanity would endure, humanity would rise, humanity would burn. In time, new alliances were formed, but they were not built on weakness or fear, they were built on respect. The galaxy had learned that humans did not kneel to silence, they answered it, and their answer echoed in fire. So it was written in the stars. The galaxy turned its back, others fell silent, but humanity spoke with fire. And in that fire, the galaxy finally listened. The silence was gone, the fire remained, and the final echo belonged not to the galaxy, but to humanity.